It looks like the cogs are turning at Arsenal with both incomings and outgoings, but mainly focusing on sales today. We get some clarification around prices, but there's still some interesting news as to some new players being linked to the Gunners. This is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time, 9 a.m. here in Italy, Tuscany. I can proudly report that yesterday was my first taste of authentic, this time around, I haven't had it before, but authentic Italian pasta. Oh my goodness, so good. So good. And gelato afterwards as well. It was a great day. It was a chill day, relaxed day. This is mainly a relaxing holiday. It's not a go out, see loads of sights. We're in the middle of nowhere, a couple of like small villages around. If you want to get anywhere, you're walking up a giant hill that's taking it out of you. But it was a very, very nice experience, and certainly one that will be lodged in my brain forevermore, which is, I'm looking forward to it. And I'm looking forward, hopefully, to seeing plenty more of your kind comments in the chat box as well. Let's go to Jose. Good morning to you and to Paul and to Morgie. Runs with Cows, Backshine, Clincy, Matt G. We've got Giti, we've got P Sharp, we've got Olawale, Stephen, Brad, Martin, Kim, Luke Shaw, Maximir, Stevie, Mr. Ree, Ryan, James, Tabani, Luke. We've got Adagoke, Marley, Kevin, Barry, Arasilki, and plenty more of you guys and girls as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. Drunks Are Us also points out, as probably they need on most mornings, a proper coffee also available over there. If only I was a coffee person, and I'm not. I'm a tea man, which is still available here, but I can't, what's the words, bed into the coffee aficionados and enjoyers that are here. But certainly some of the other people that I'm staying with will be leaning very heavily into that, I'm sure. But thank you so much to you all for joining me. Really appreciate your time. I hope you've had a fantastic start to your week. It doesn't feel like Monday for me, but I'm sure it does for you. And I hope that your week of work goes quickly and successfully as well, and that you're doing good and well as well. Right, let's jump into today's stories, shall we? We start with Kieran Tierney. According to the Sunday Post, Arsenal are set to accept a price of around £10 million for the Scottish international. There's interest from a number of clubs, it seems. Celtic could, of course, be one that rejoin the race, with the price going below less than half of what Arsenal ultimately paid for the Scottish international not so long ago. I say not so long ago, it's actually longer than maybe people realise. It was 5 years ago Arsenal signed him for £25 million from Celtic. And it does seem, of course, that Arsenal would be having and needing, it seems, to accept a much, much lower fee for Kieran Tierney if and indeed when he is sold from the club. I'm just looking back over some of my estimations. I said around £15 million for Tierney. I'd hope that we get upwards of £10 million, but any club looking for a decent left-back who's, of course, known for his injury issues would be getting something of a bargain, I think, if they were to get hold of Kieran Tierney for around £10 million. But that is the suggestion of the Sunday Post, and it's not the only Scottish news that we'll be talking about during the show, so stay tuned for that. Porto, according to A Bola, Portuguese outlet, are said to be considering a move for Arsenal's Fabio Vieira. I do think that there is a deal to be done with Fabio Vieira this summer. He is a player, of course, whose time and minutes on the field have been incredibly restricted at the club. And there were suggestions, of course, from The Athletic that he wasn't particularly training all that well. And maybe that kind of bleeds into the idea that an exit could indeed be on the cards. How much would Fabio Vieira go for? How much would Porto, of course, be willing to pay? They're a very rich club. They get a lot of money from their sales, and certainly would be able to do business for Fabio Vieira. So I'd be looking for upwards of £20 million, I think, to see Fabio Vieira leave. He only signed 2 years ago for 34. So you'd be looking, I think, upwards of £20 million for Fabio Vieira, who's had his number of also injury issues too. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing how much money Arsenal make from their transfers. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing if Arsenal can pull off quite the deal if Alan Nixon's report of Aaron Ramsdale is true, which is suggestions that it wasn't a £30 million valuation that Arsenal looked at for Ramsdale, but instead there was a valuation that put Newcastle offset at £50 million. Now, I'd be shocked if Arsenal were able to get hold of 50 million for Ramsdale, of course. And you know my grounded view of player fees, of what Arsenal could get for their talents. But 50 million quid seems a lot of money, of course. But I very much hope and keep my fingers crossed that they are looking to get as close to that as they can for Ramsdale. But that would make sense as perhaps to why Newcastle have turned their attentions to James Trafford, who does look the far more likely option for them this summer. Considerations are upwards of £15 million for Trafford, although Burnley were hoping, I think, to get closer to 30. There is a deal to be done, and Manchester City, of course, have a 20% sell-on clause in any sale that they get for James Trafford as well. But Aaron Ramsdale, I think that we were talking yesterday about the idea of a loan. I think that the majority of us understand that a loan would be quite smart for Arsenal to use because it would get him regular game time next season. He'd still have 2 years remaining on his deal, 1+1 from 2025. And then with a full season under his belt and plenty more minutes would certainly represent a better investment for other clubs. But again, one to keep an eye on. Now, in terms of incomings, I said there'd be more news on Scottish players, and I wasn't joking. Arsenal are said to be keen on St Johnstone's 15-year-old Callan Hamill. This report coming out from the Sunday Post. And in Scotland, there are suggestions that Callan Hamill is somebody, of course, as we know, Arsenal are targeting an improvement in their youth options. And the 15-year-old defender would join the likes of Braden Clark, of course, who arrived on a free transfer after leaving Wolves during the summer. There's been suggestions that there have been other very young players that the club are also looking at to join their youth ranks, as many leave the club. We reported, of course, the 22 players that are expected to leave at the end of this month. And we know there are 3 more that could still leave in Carl Hine, Amario Koja-Dubry and Well Waters as well. So still plenty of ins and outs around the youth side expected, but it seems that Callan Hamill is one of the latest names to be linked with a move to Arsenal. Now, another player, of course, and our headline story of the day surrounds Joshua Zirkzee, the Bologna centre-forward. Arsenal are still said to be closely monitoring the situation with Zirkzee, along with Manchester United. However, plenty of reports from Italy have suggested, of course, that AC Milan are the most likely destination for Zirkzee at this stage, and that there is already agreement on personal terms with the player, and that indeed a release clause around the £40 million figure, maybe slightly less than that, is indeed expected to be kind of put forward by the Milanese side. And I think that Zirkzee, of course, offers any club plenty of quality and potential, but there was always some question marks about whether or not he was of the level of the standard that Arsenal would be looking for. And when it comes to younger options, Joshua Zirkzee didn't necessarily match up as well against the likes of Benjamin Sesko. The latest on Sesko, there isn't really any latest. There is no update from what we talked about yesterday. Situation is as it was. And as I did mention a few days ago, it has seemed to be further away than the noise around the Sesko deal certainly suggested to be true. And that story, I think, is being justified at this stage, which is obviously good from my personal perspective. So I'm semi-happy, but at the same time, I'd quite like Arsenal to push ahead with a deal for Sesko, and hopefully things will change in the near future as we get closer, of course, to Friday's European Championship kickoff. Speaking of kicking off, I reckon plenty of people would kick off in a very positive way if they were to land a Thierry Henry signed Arsenal shirt, which is exactly what you could do if you were to be successful in the latest prize draw. There are less than half of the tickets available of this prize, courtesy of Football Prizes, of which you can find a link to down in today's video description. You can also win a signed Gilberto Silva shirt, a signed Jack Wilshere shirt. I don't know if any of you saw Jack Wilshere's movement in the Soccer Aid game yesterday. My goodness me, the man still got it, hasn't he? And you can also win a signed Fabio Vieira photo too. Best of luck to all of you that are getting involved in the latest prize competitions, UK only. And best of luck to you all. And let me know if indeed any of you are successful, as we have had done so many times before. Right, let's go to part 2 and your questions then right after this. Right, jumping into the chat box then and tackling as many of your comments as we can. We start with, let's scroll up, shall we? Because I probably missed a few comments as well. Cole says you're a team man, Tom. You've just gone up even further in my estimations, if that were even possible. Thank you, mate. That's very kind indeed. Let's go to Jitty, who says, Tom, do you think it would be an amazing summer if we signed Eze, Zirkzee or Sesko? Diomande and Elise. I think this could this business potentially make us unstoppable? And is this something that you could see happening? Well, I think, ironically, whilst those players are certainly on there as some of the best options that Arsenal could sign, I think you've missed the most important signing of them all, which is a very, very good central midfielder that Arsenal need to bring in as well. Eze and Elise are certainly more wide players, an attacking midfielder more so in the case of Eze. Zirkzee, Sesko, of course, centre forwards. Diomande is a centre half, and so you're missing that centre midfielder. I think that Elise and Eze are players that may move this summer, but I don't necessarily think it will be Arsenal that move for them. It doesn't seem that Arsenal are on the chase of those two players at the moment. More Spurs, Manchester United, Chelsea, and those abroad as well are looking at those players. Zirkzee, of course, I think, as we've just discussed, will be off to AC Milan. Sesko, there is a decent chance Arsenal could be the club that land him. Could still sign a new deal, of course, with RB Leipzig. And then you've got Diomande, of course, of Sporting, whose links have gone very quiet over the last, month or so. It's gone very quiet on Diomande of late. So I'm not necessarily expecting any movement on that unless there is a surprise for Arsenal fans. Amiral Gooner says, Tom, do you think there is a big issue with players coming to big clubs and failing, as there seems to be a lot, not just at our club, of course, but others as well? There's always a risk associated, as we say, with every single signing that Arsenal or any other big club can make. It is a big amount of expectation, on players. They've got to make that key next step in their careers, and the expectations are huge. So I don't think there's necessarily a big issue when it comes to players making that step. You've got Manchester United as an example, and Chelsea too, of players making those huge steps to make that step up. Anthony, of course, we know of Mudryk, but you can go further back than that. I think there was a player, of course, at Tottenham that people aren't talking about the failure of this deal, and that's Tanguy Ndombele. French midfielder, was rated incredibly highly at Lyon prior to his move to Spurs, 60 million plus quid, and has failed dramatically. But no one's really talking about that deal, not necessarily coming to anything other than an absolute, lack of any kind of inspiration from that 60 million. So I think there's always a risk, but ultimately it's a risk-reward situation, and sometimes clubs get big returns. Thankfully for Arsenal, we have a really good record of late with our investment. Fabio Vieira stands out really as the only questionable big investment, and big in quotation marks, £34 million in today's market is not huge, but it's the biggest question mark that we've got at the moment on Edu's records. Let's go to Steve, who says, morning, Tom. Do you think the transfer market at the moment might be somewhat deflated because of the PSR and FFP situations? There's always going to be that potential that those two are going to have an influence on this market. I think that for Arsenal, we have remained pretty well inside the restrictions. Other clubs like Aston Villa haven't, and are going to be pressurised into making a potential sale during this window. Some say that that's not fair. Some say that, teams like City and Chelsea have been getting away with spending huge amounts of money for years, and now these other clubs like Newcastle and Villa are spending big money and now being punished for it. But it is the rules, at the moment. You have to abide by those rules. Every club is trying to do that, and some clubs have found ways to abide by them more cleverly, Chelsea, than others, of course. But it's the reality of the situation right now, and I think that some clubs may indeed be a little bit anxious, apprehensive about doing deals because of those. But specifically in the UK, those rules don't necessarily apply in the same manner abroad. So clubs abroad will still be asking for big fees for their players when Premier League sides come calling. Ronald says, would Xavi Simons be a great deal on loan? He could play right wing, left wing, and cover for Ødegaard at attacking mid. I think people know my admiration for Xavi Simons. I'd love to see that deal done. I think it'd be a great addition to the side. And I think you, Ronald, highlight all the areas where he would add plenty of quality. Drew says, how much would it take to take Mainu away from Manchester United? I think you're going to be looking upwards of 100 million at the moment, Drew. That's the form that he's in, at the age that he's in, the contract he's going to be under. It's going to cost you a lot of money. I don't think it is possible at all. Ben says, question for us in the chat box. I've seen the asking price for Jadon Sancho is 40 million euros. Would you take him at 40 million euros? I wouldn't be wildly against the idea of it. I don't think Man United would want to sell to Arsenal. There's a player there. There's a big talent there. He still came out at the end of this season, as one of the highest performing contributors of goals and assists, I think, in terms of per minute. He did very, very well when he went on that loan to Borussia Dortmund and ended as a starting figure in a Champions League final. So you can't begrudge, the effort that he's managed to put in. But his minutes were incredibly restricted. I think he ended the season on 5 goal contributions in just under 1,000 minutes. So you're looking at a goal contribution in less than 1,000 minutes. You're looking at a goal contribution around every other game, which, considering his form and considering what he was in, I think comes out very, very well indeed. But he is going to have to do a lot more, I think, to earn a move somewhere else other than Borussia Dortmund. I don't think I see any other move other than Dortmund probably happening in this window. Maximilian says, Tom, the issue is not us selling these players for a lower price than what we got them. The issues arise when a rival club sells an average player for a very good price, which makes us look a bit like duds. And look, sadly, that's the reality. And Arsenal's reputation in the sales market has not been good. Clubs know that Arsenal have sold players incredibly cheaply at times. You think of Bert Leno as a good example, Matteo Guendouzi perhaps as another example, Konstantinos Mavropanos as another one. But more recently, Arsenal have improved that reputation with deals like Folarin Balogun going for upwards of £30 million, Granit Xhaka with a year left on his deal going for upwards of £20 million. These deals, Joe Willock for 25, have improved the reputation of the club in that area a lot. So we are looking to be stringent and strict, and, we're backing ourselves in the market. So let's wait and see what happens. Ansa says, if we're talking about a player that can play with Ødegaard against low blocks and cover for Ødegaard in case of injury or fatigue, shouldn't we be looking at the likes of Eze? I agree, Ansa, and I think I agreed with the point earlier on. Eze would be a good signing for the attacking midfield role. It's not the priority position for Arsenal this summer, only if indeed the likes of Smith Rowe and Vieira are sold. I think will Arsenal move for one. But whilst both of them are still here, I don't think you'll see Arsenal move for that type of player unless, of course, as I say, that they move on. Daniel Shaw says, I've just seen Arsenal interested in Solanke, a £65 million rated move. I'm not sure where the source is, Dan. You'll have to let me know what the source in that is. But Arsenal's interest in Solanke is well documented. We know that it has existed for a little while. And I look forward to seeing if he indeed does get a bit closer to the idea of more stories coming out about Solanke and how people react to those stories, because he's not going to be the inspiring choice for many people, but he's had a fantastic season for Bournemouth, and you can't begrudge the level that he's risen to. But he's not favourable. He's not a left field pick. He's not too unknown. He's English, which never stands players in good stead when it comes to kind of the broad spectrum of views on players. But he is a very good player and a very good striker as well. Fuad says, Tom, what would you do in the centre-forward position if Sesko doesn't happen? I'd be patient with it. I wouldn't rush into it. We've got Havertz, we've got Trossard, we've got Jesus still at the club that can all play in those positions. I wouldn't be rushing into any centre-forward deals if indeed the wrong ones are, the likely ones. Gyökeres remains a good option, and you never know what could come up and what could materialise later on in the window. But the idea of the centre-forward being a panic buy is something I do not want to see happening during this window. It is not a position that is, in my opinion, absolutely vital for Arsenal to go big on. It's a position that Arsenal needs to sign the right player in. And if you can't get the right player for that position, please don't sign anybody for the sake of it. I don't want to see people turning around and, saying, we didn't go and get a striker, go and get this guy, or go and get this guy. He's available for 20 million. Why didn't we get Guirassy for his 70 million release clause? I don't want to see things like that, because they're not smart. They're not deals in which Arsenal should be looking to do because we can do it for the sake of it. People forget, they're like, well, £17 million, that's not a lot of our budget, and then we can just buy another striker later on. It doesn't work that way. When you buy a player, it takes up a spot in the squad, and that's got to be cautiously approached. As soon as you commit to a player, you're filling that player in the squad. Think about how long Cedric's been here. Think about how long El Neni was here. For all the record of, I was happy for El Neni to stay because obviously of this situation, but Cedric, of course, we signed players on that weren't at the level for 2 longer deals. We can't do that. We can't overcommit. We can't overextend ourselves on players that do not fit what we're trying to achieve, that do not reach the levels that we want to, or don't have the potential to reach the levels of what we're trying to achieve. So don't sign players for the sake of it. It's just absolutely pointless in terms of doing that. I think Clive's in the chat says Newcastle are a great example. If we have a quick look at Newcastle United's business, since, of course, their new owners came in, the Saudi-backed owners. You think about someone, I'm thinking of Target as a potential deal. They had an immediate improvement in their form, and you had Target join, you had Burn join. Are these players that are going to establish you in Champions League qualification spots? No, they're not. So you might have one good season and one good uplift, but they've gone backwards, and now they're fully outside of European competitions entirely. And so that has changed things massively. They, went and bought Lewis Hall. There's an expectation of that deal potentially becoming a permanent one this summer. And in fact, it may already have become permanent this summer. Has he taken them forwards? I don't think so. Obviously, the Sandro Tonali deal has been full of issues. Harvey Barnes arrived for a big amount of money but hasn't played because of injuries. Tino Livramento arrived, has been okay, but Kieran Trippier was a good buy because he was an established player of a good level and provided plenty of assists. But is Livramento going to take them forwards? I'm not so sure. They signed Chris Wood very early on and then sold him pretty quickly as well. Joe Willock from us, of course. Is Joe Willock going to be a player that takes you to that next level, establishes you in the Champions League? I'm not sure. The players that have done that, like Isak, Gordon, and to a lesser extent Sven Botman as well, these have been good signings. Bruno Guimaraes, another good signing. But they haven't been able to establish themselves. Last summer was not necessarily a great summer for Newcastle. They lost Tonali because of the situation. They lost Barnes a lot because of injuries. Livramento, of course, who'd already come back from a major injury issue, was a big risk of a signing and didn't necessarily push them forwards. Decent player. Lewis Hall came in as an alternative, actually, to Kieran Tierney. If you remember back to last summer, they were very interested in Kieran Tierney. Lewis Hall came in, didn't dislodge their starting option of Dan Burn for the majority of the campaign. And we can't afford to put ourselves into those places where we are signing players for the sake of it and not taking us forwards. It's really important we don't follow that. Clive says, on sales, our rivals do not want to strengthen us, and buying from them makes us a bigger threat, and they know that we will spend well. We talked about Jadon Sancho earlier on. I think the Newcastle comment's probably more related to that previous point in terms of Guimaraes and Isak, of course. They won't want to sell to Arsenal. They've got ambitions of trying to close the gap to Arsenal, so they aren't going to want to sell to us. The idea of Arsenal going and buying Premier League proven talent is something that we wanted to do, and a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, it was much easier to do it than it is now. Arsenal are now in a position where any clubs in the Premier League selling to Arsenal are going to ask for huge amounts of money, or they're going to be very anti the idea in its entirety. So we've got to be shrewd when it comes to deals, and we've got to be clever when it comes to deals as well. Let's go to Amaral Gooner says people need to look at the so-called big clubs suffering from PSR because of overpaying for players and wages. Mo says, hi Tom, are we still in for Isak? Do you think he's worth 80 million? You're going to have to pay maybe double that to get Isak through the door. So the idea of Isak leaving for 80 million is an absolute non-starter. Arsenal's interest is real, but sadly, the realistic nature of that deal is simply not one that I can see happening. Dwayne says, Tom, how we performed. My priority is getting bench options to a similar standard as our first choice. 11 over 100 million strikers. Your thoughts? I think that means in terms of you'd rather have first choice 11 and improve the bench over signing a 100 million pound striker. And I do tend to agree. I do think that Arsenal improving the depth of their squad and raising the floor is a more important task this season and this summer than it ever has before. So I agree, Dwayne. I don't think Arsenal necessarily are going to be in the market for a 100 million pound plus striker unless something drastically changes in the market for us. And I think the idea is more so about improving the squad overall to become more competitive so we can compete across better in multiple competitions. And of course, close that gap to Manchester City as well. Baron says, hi Tom, in regards to the centre midfielder, besides Bruno Guimaraes, the other names are not really that much better, if at all, than Partey. And that's not really a surprise, Baron, to be honest, because Partey is, when he's fully fit and on form, a world-class centre midfielder. So it's not as if that you're going to be able to go out and sign a midfielder this window that is immediately better than Partey. But what you can go out and do is sign a player that's close to the level of Partey, 7 years younger than him, and has a ceiling that could potentially go higher than Partey. So you have Rice, you have that replacement, you have obviously the depth of Jorginho as well. You've got the likes of Nuneri coming through. You've still got Ødegaard, maybe one of Vieira and Smith Rowe still here. and you've got those options. So that's why bringing in a player that maybe isn't at the level of Partey yet as a 30, 31-year-old world-class midfielder when he's fully fit and on form, but you can go out and get a younger option that's, nearly as good as Partey and can offer you plenty going forwards. Not Chris says, should we sign Neves from Benfica? Absolutely, but I would love to sign Neves. But again, the reality is that he's going to cost you £100 million, and I don't think that's a feasible and realistic deal for Arsenal to do during this window. P Sharp says, which clubs with all the financial rules, etc., do you think have the biggest spending potential in the upcoming window? Interesting question. Who has the biggest spending potential? Often you do look at promoted sides quite a lot. You think about the money that's made when they get promoted. You think about the spending of those clubs prior to this. Leicester definitely don't count as that because Leicester have got financial problems. I think Ipswich have got a big potential to spend during this window. And Southampton, I'll be interested as well because they've only just gone down from the Premier League and come straight back up. Maybe Southampton less so. Ipswich, I think, maybe have got quite a lot of spending potential for this window. And that's why we're seeing links to Smith Rowe and Nketiah for like 20, 30 million pounds. Other teams in the Premier League that have got spending potential in terms of player teams that have done well to sell in the recent times. I mean, I don't know how Liverpool are. I think Liverpool maybe have some scope to spend during this window. Manchester City, of course, will because they've made such huge amounts of money through commercial deals and through their, through what they've won. They're very financially, even though they've got all this ongoing stuff going on, they are still, I think, expected to spend money during this window. So, there you go. It's as simple as that, I guess. Nando says, hi, Tom. At what point will Gooner start looking at Smith Rowe and Trossard as Pepe and Willian 2.0? Leo plays in all his positions, is taking his minutes and potential and goals and assists, and Smith Rowe is losing the fight. I don't think it's fair to put Trossard in the same realms as Pepe and Willian. Trossard has been excellent for us. I think that Trossard has obviously pushed out Martinelli from a starting position. Willian and Pepe, for instance, were pushed out by Saka and Martinelli in the squad. So I don't think Trossard falls into that category. Smith Rowe, I can see where you're coming from because obviously he's failed to establish himself and he is gradually working his way out of the team. But I really don't get it. I don't understand that one at all. Baron says Havertz ended his season at centre-forward and he will be the centre-forward for Germany at the Euros, as we all know, and he will be starting Arsenal's centre-forward position next season. That's my expectation. I think that Havertz will be the starting centre-forward for Arsenal at the start of next season. It's about whether or not he'll be the starting centre-forward at the end of next season. That's the interesting part of that question. I got Germany in my sweepstake, by the way, for my group of friends at home. So I have a hope that maybe Germany will go far in this Euros this summer. Malik says, do you think it will be a battle of Kudus, or do you think he'll stay for another year for more experience? Kudus is a player who, if you can go and get. If you need to pay 60 million to get him from West Ham, go and bid 60 million for Kudus. 100%. Would love to see Mohamed Kudus at Arsenal. I think he'd be an excellent addition to the wide areas. Perfect foil for Bukayo Saka. Rotational option in terms of quality. Raises the level of options we've got in those wide areas. Without question. In fact, I'm a little bit surprised I didn't talk about him in my dream options for wingers when we did our dream show. And by the way, maybe tomorrow, maybe Wednesday will be our next episode of the Dream content creators picking their dream options for Arsenal summer. So make sure you look out for that. But that'll either be tomorrow or Wednesday. Ben says, any idea why selling clubs like Brighton, Dortmund, Ajax never seem to spend that money? They always seem to be lowballing teams like Dortmund with Martin. It must be annoying from Chelsea's point of view. So it's a really good question, Ben. About kind of, as we know, clubs like Ajax, clubs like Brighton. Brighton more recently, to be fair to them, have started to spend money and have started to spend that capital that they have been bringing in for a number of their players. So Brighton, I think less so, are included in that. I'm just having a quick look at Borussia Dortmund's transfer record over the last few years and seeing if they too have been spending money on players. They brought in the likes of Nicholas Füllkrug, of course, who came in as an established centre-forward. He wasn't like a young guy. He came in as the key man to be a new centre-forward for them. But you're right to point out Dortmund. You're right, especially to point out Ajax in terms of their spending. Ajax have always made big money on players whenever they've sold. And they haven't necessarily reinvested that money into further players. They just seem very content at making plenty of money. And you could argue that they've actually suffered from that because recently they've become far less competitive as a club. PSV have taken over as the dominant force in Dutch football, along with Feyenoord, who have obviously risen as well. So maybe because they've not spent that money, it has destabilized them to some degree. So Dortmund last summer made a profit. Obviously, they sold Jude Bellingham to Real Madrid. They bought Nemetcha, Sabitzer, Fulkrug, but still made a 40-odd million euro profit. The previous summer before that, they actually made a loss. They sold Erling Haaland for the release clause, Manuel Akanji as well. Both went to Manchester City, but they bought Sebastian Haller from Ajax. They bought Karim Adeyemi from RB Salzburg. They bought Nico Schlotterbeck from Freiburg, fantastic defender. Julian Duranville from Anderlecht and Anthony Modeste. Anthony Modeste from Cologne. I didn't realise they signed Modeste. He must have not played at all this season. If indeed that happened, I don't remember Modeste. But he's already left. He was bought in 2022. He left in 2023 for a free transfer to El Ali. So there you go. In the previous summer before that, again, they made a profit. Jadon Sancho being sold to Man United. Bellerdi went to Marseille. Thomas Delaney went to Sevilla. They bought Daniel Marlin and Gregor Kobel, who looks like one of the best goalkeepers in the world now, signed for just 15 million euros. Incredible. The summer before that, they did make a loss, but they bought Jude Bellingham. They bought Emre Can. Thomas Meunier arrived on a free transfer. The summer before that, they made a profit. Oh, sorry, they just made a loss again. So, I mean, we're looking at this now. They are spending money. That's summer 2019. Mats Hummels, Nico Schultz, Torgan Hazard, Julian Brandt, Paco Alcacer, and Erling Haaland came in during that summer. So they made a loss. The summer before that, they did make a profit. Pulisic, Yarmolenko, Sokratis, all left for Arsenal, West Ham and Chelsea. So it's an interesting one. I think they are spending money maybe more than people are giving them credit for, like yourself, Ben. But you're right to some degree about the likes of Ajax in particular. And I think Ajax have perhaps actually suffered from that in recent times. Clive says, on the Dream Picks videos, I think I misunderstood the task. I got a bit chatty. Clive, I didn't say anything because I just assumed that's what you would do. So you did absolutely fine, mate. And thank you for your contributions. The listeners certainly appreciated it. And thank you, everybody, for listening to today's show. I really appreciate your time and your listenership, as always. If you could be so kind to drop a like on the video. I think I forgot to mention the 1K everyday target. So we're going to really need you to be on it today to helping us reach that. So if you've not yet pressed that like button, please make sure that you do as we try and reach our daily target of 1,000 on the channel. And again, a massive thank you for those helping us reach that target for our uploaded video from 2 days ago, where I really didn't remind you at all like I usually do on the live show. So thank you for that. Have a fantastic start to your weeks. Enjoy your Mondays. Get through it. Stay safe. Stay well. Stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.